everyone. Thanks for joining us here on this informal chat with all of our current Yorkville students. We're super excited to come back for part 2. Last time we had so much fun talking about a number of things that we didn't get to some of the things we wanted to talk about. So we decided we would make a part 2. And so welcome to part 2. If you missed the first part of the other conversation, you can backtrack on Instagram or go to our digital resources page and you will see the beginning of that. And so you'll be introduced to all the people who are here, but I will just quickly say we have Nadera with us. Nadera, give us a wave, and Rebecca and Jennifer with us today. And these are all of our Yorkville students. Nadera is soon to be graduated in about a month. And Jennifer and Rebecca have a second term after the new year and will be done middle of April. So super excited to see these women accomplishing their goals and moving through their training. And so we wanted to put these wonderful therapists on your radar again and talk to them about some of their favorite resources. For those of you who don't know, at Covey Wellness Center, we have sort of my brainchild, because I'm a huge bibliophile and I love books and I'm obsessed about them and I recommend them often. And, it's just so important to me to be able to provide people with access to really good resources and supportive materials that are out there, because you can't be at therapy every single day. And it's not possible to work through every single problem in a therapy situation, or even with a good friend. We need to resource ourselves with really good things that can support our learning, support our growth, keep us moving forward, give us great activities and tips and tricks for taking good care of ourselves. And I think sometimes like self-care or like self-help even gets kind of a bad rap. And I think that's probably because people are not finding the right resources, to be honest. I think it's about finding really solid, research-based, well-written, helpful resources and putting them into the hands of people. I think there's a lot of self-help that gets a bad rap because it's kind of like, I don't know, the word that's coming to mind is pithy, but I don't think that's the right word. It's like, it's just kind of surface and maybe doesn't go deep enough or honest enough. And I think that's also a term that's kind of changing. Like, I think we're moving away from some of that self-help culture to more wellness. And I think it's just the stigma's changing. Does that resonate, ladies, with you? Like, I feel like, like I think about my mom and I think about the self-help movement and how it kind of has a bit of a vibe to it, but I don't really think that's where people are at today with it. And I think we're moving into some really, really great resources. And we've got lots of researchers and writers out there who are providing really great stuff, both in written and podcasting form. And there's all kinds of stuff out there. So all of that to say, it's a real passion of ours at Covey Wellness Center to have different points of entry for people so that they can access resources. And so not everybody is able to access individual therapy sessions, even financially sometimes, or even just from a scheduling standpoint, they can't. But we have all these different tools like books, oils, notebooks, like all sorts of things in the store that are at a really accessible price point for people to begin to support their wellness journey. And also to supplement what they're doing in their therapy sessions as well. So if you're talking about journaling practices, you can grab a journal. If you're talking about sleep hygiene, you can grab an oil. If you're talking about self-compassion, you can get a book that's going to direct you through some activities in self-compassion. So I really like that integrated approach. And a big part of what we do here is work through our own learning around our own resources, but then also sharing that forward. So great resources that we've had, making them available to our clients and sharing the wisdom that we've gleaned from those, both in session and out of session on the shelves. So it's not just books, of course. There's lots of great podcasts, articles, lots of great spaces to get good information. There's probably an abundance of information, and that might be a little bit of its own problem. But we just thought today we would take some time to share sort of the resources and topics that are resonating with us and make some recommendations, sort of like a, how you go into Indigo and you have like the different staff picks, and like, this is Jennifer's pick and you get the sticker on it or like the sticky note. We'll kind of do that sort of thing around some podcasts and books and resources that we find super helpful. and just see where the conversation takes us. And we'd encourage you to come in. I'm really proud of the bookshelf that we've created here, and we're adding to it all the time, and it's growing all the time. And I'm really proud of the curated number of books that we have here to support people. There's some really, really great titles. So it's a great place to start if you're looking for something resource-wise. Okay, so let's jump in, and we'll just start by sharing like a resource that's resonating with you right now, and talk a little bit about that. And then we'll just see kind of where that conversation takes us, in terms of sharing. Maybe there's some links, maybe there's some spin-offs questions. So we'll just kind of see where it rolls. All right. So Jennifer, how about you start it off? Because you're going to talk about one of my favorite books, I think. So we'll just let you do that.
In preparing for today, I was thinking of how this, for me, really speaks to the whole notion of we can only meet people as deeply as we've met ourselves. And so when I think of the books that resonate with me, these often begin as books that I have incorporated in my personal life. And it's typically reflective of my own lived experiences. So, unbeknownst to me at the moment, I'm not aware of the fact that it's going to hold such meaning and significance, and that at some point in time, it may seem appropriate to integrate it within session. So it's a blessing in that sense, I guess. There were two people that came to mind for me within this, and I'm a huge proponent of both of their work. First and foremost is Brene Brown. And for whatever reason, it feels important for me to say that I became a fan of hers before Oprah did.
Okay.
I was not influenced by Oprah. It was actually a very dear friend of mine who works within our field, lives out east, and she had suggested that I pick up Brene's book, The Gifts of Imperfection. And I remember when I read that initially, it felt like she was speaking my language. It felt like she got me on a level that served to validate so much of what I was going through at that point in my life. And that was about 11 years ago.
Because it's in its 10th anniversary reprint right now.
I know.
Yeah.
Very exciting. And it's one of those books that I've picked it up in the last 10 years a couple of times, and dependent upon where I'm at in my life, I'm able to pull something new from it. So I think one of the things that I liked about it was it touched on normalizing the aspect of vulnerability. So again, in working through a lot of the guiding posts within the book, I've been able to at times integrate that within session when we're talking about the concept of authenticity, or looking at our inner critic and the narrative that's formed within that. The whole notion of wholehearted living, and what does that speak to for us from a standpoint of how do we not only show up for ourselves, but how do we show up in other instances of our lives, be it personal or professional. And so again, I think the way in which I'm able to support clients within that capacity speaks to the work that I've done in my own personal life through a lot of the, bibliotherapy that's either been suggested through, be it, friends, family, other professionals. So, and the other individual that I'm really drawn to, his work is that of Gabor Mate's. So, I think the first book that I read of his was In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, which specifically looks at addiction components. And then since then, I've gone back to, and a couple times I've read it, is The Cost of Hidden Stress. So looking at the whole piece around how our body responds within our nervous system in terms of trauma responses, and what that looks like, and how that can manifest and present in various forms of and degrees of ailments and health conditions. So again, serving as an eye-opener for me personally, and then allowing me to then take that knowledge and offer it within session. And then at times offer it as a form of in-between session work that clients and I will even do together, where if they already have the book, or if they purchased it, a couple sessions prior, we can actually read a session, or read a chapter rather, and then integrate that into our following session as a means to kind of take a deep dive in terms of what's going on within their life at that time and how it's relevant to that particular book. So I believe it's Jenna Fisher.
Sounds right.
Does that sound right? And
Yep.
I wish I had her resources here, because I've just purchased them within the last 3 months. So I have a flip chart that I integrate within sessions. So from a standpoint of offering visual aids and then also a talking point, what I like about that is it touches on all types of learners, be it visual, audio, or kinesthetic. So we're able to see it, hear it, and do it within session. And then ideally within that, it's going to help in terms of memory retention. So the client's hopefully going to take away something and remember something from walking through some of these pieces. So that particular one is presented in a flip chart, and it's great visual. It's all color, but again, it goes through looking at trauma responses and the nervous system, different regions of the brain, and offering, an explanation as to, well, why am I feeling this way from a physical standpoint? So we would reference that as somatic symptoms. So looking at these bodily symptoms that present, and then connecting that to what's going on a neurological level, on a biological level, in order for clients to make meaning and make sense as to what's happening to them. And oftentimes in doing that, it serves to validate their experience, and then also within that normalize it. Because if you've ever experienced a somatic symptom, it can be really scary. So, I like a lot of her work in that sense. I find that the way in which she writes, it's easy to understand, and from there it's easy for me to communicate that within session. She also has a workbook that I have yet to integrate into session, because I need to familiarize myself more with it, but I'm eager to learn through that as well. So
so many things there, Jennifer, to pick up on. I'll try and just kind of summarize a few of them, because I want to key in on those points. There are so many great points. So one of the things I was thinking about there is just how many different topics and components that people are dealing with that come up through those resources, right? So for example, perfectionism, self-censorship, and living vulnerably or wholeheartedly, like having that congruence and alignment in how you're living in the world. Those are big topics,
yes,
that Brene Brown addresses in lots of her resources, but specifically in that book, that we see a lot with clients, right? And so we have that piece coming through, and then Gabor Mate, like all of the trauma work and sort of that idea. And I think it's going to segue to maybe Rebecca soon about around the body keeping the score, and the sense of we do carry our stories in our physical bodies as well, and to try and understand and tease that out and understand what holistic healing looks like. And his work is so important with that, and with addictions, right? Those pieces, like, so he has so much to say on so many of the topics that we're dealing with. And then in terms of those visuals and working through, it's like thinking about what types of learners, what types of people is the teacher and me coming up, but who's coming in, who's sitting in front of us in the session, and how are we providing resources within that session and directing it in ways that will help them integrate the part of the learning that's the psychoeducation part, and then from that pull out insights that are related to their own. Oh, that's why, because my amygdala is hijacking my prefrontal cortex, and that's why I can't find my keys when I'm stressed out. And so like little simple insights like that begin to get them to understand the way that their body works and integrates mind, body, soul, like all of it, right? And that's really an approach for us. So many resources tie that in, and we bring them in different ways in a client-centered approach to try and address some of those things. And I just think of like how many ways, just even those two big names, I would say, in the field, right? It just provides so much wealth of information to support. And I think it's really interesting because some books are really well set up for like a bibliotherapy thing to do with their therapist. So some people are very self-guided in that, but there's quite a bit of like accountability and support to actually help someone work through, because I don't know about you guys, but sometimes we have a tendency to consume things, like read things, but we can't apply them. Right. We can't translate. Like it's that idea of like information is not transformation. So how do we take it in and then like figure out where that's going to be lived out in our day-to-day experience, right? And so I think about, you know, if somebody is dealing with perfectionism, would it be helpful to work through Brene Brown's book and take it chapter by chapter and really pull that together and again, teacher in me, but consolidate that learning and help them to implement that into like real-time strategy. So not just insight, but also like that application to, well, what does that translate to now that I understand, yeah, I want to live vulnerably and wholeheartedly. Well, what does that look like in my particular situation? And so definitely people who are inclined to work through resources in that way. We all have some clients who really like to read. Can we integrate that as part of their client-centered work so that we're doing a number of sessions around those resources with them and helping them to really maximize the benefit of that, right? It's like the information is there, you know, the provocation of reading that stirs up all these things, but then where can we help them go somewhere with that really transforms them? So I love that you mentioned that, Jennifer, about how even a really great resource, you can go back to it a few years later and a few years later, and you're like, whoa, there's like new insights here for me. And so it becomes a resource we can pull on and off the shelf. You know, it's great.
Yeah.
Did I miss anything? Any thoughts on what Jennifer shared there, Nadera or Rebecca, in terms of anything that's resonating with you from what she shared, or any thoughts or comments before we go to some other resources here?
I just want to say I really liked, Jennifer, how you stated that, you know, part of us as therapists looking at resources is also seeing what resonates with us, really, and really trying to focus on building ourselves up and understanding ourselves, learning ourselves, understanding even how our thought process works, because that's all going to be very influential to ourselves in session, right? And how we show up for our client, how do we integrate resources and knowledge, and that's all part of learning about ourselves. So I really liked how you mentioned you take a lot of it and you really internalize it and see how it can be applicable to you. And I feel like I do the same with resources, because it's kind of hard not to. I mean, you're learning so much, and it's helpful to be able to look and see how you can apply them.
I think it's important too, like just from the standpoint of our clients understanding, like we are fellow sojourners, like we are on this pathway as well, and we are figuring things out. And our clients, I often say this, like as therapists, but it's also true of parents, that like our kids and or our clients will make us do our work. Yeah. Right. Because we can't get away from it. Like the things that come up for us, we have to deal with them, and we have to do that work to practice safely and effectively, and to really be a solid support to people. You know, that doesn't mean we have to have it all figured out, thank goodness, or none of us would be able to do it, but we can be on the journey and caring for those things that are coming up for us along the way and doing our work along the way. And I don't know that everybody knows that that's true, but therapists actually are very strongly encouraged to have their own therapy and to have a lot of peer consultation and supervision as part of managing what's happening for them in their personhood and in their own lives as they do this work, because we show up as ourselves in the work. And I think sometimes, you know, people are maybe a bit shocked that therapists go to therapy, but I think that's a super important humanizing element about what's happening, you know, that we're showing up together in this space, and we're each experts in our own lives, but we're helping to facilitate the work that they're doing. And that doesn't mean that we've arrived or that somehow we're the guru, but it might mean that we have some breadcrumbs to offer along the way or something. I don't know. But yeah, anyway, I just thought that was a great point too, that, you know, we're as therapists, and here I think, you know, again, with the culture of emphasizing resources, we are asking people to continue to be, you know, perfecting their skills, maybe not perfecting, but like honing them, right? And learning as we go. I often talk about in supervision the formation of the therapist, meaning that we're being formed as we're doing therapy, as we're working with other people. We're not the same people we were before we started. And so, you know, there's a lot of growth involved on our end as well as we serve the client population. So anyway, I think that's a really great the way we integrate resources in our own lives is a really great model for what we're really trying to offer others as well.
Okay. Yes, Jennifer, you set that up quite nicely for me. So one of the resources that I have to share is The Body Keeps the Score. So the brain, mind, and body in the healing of trauma. So truth be told, I've just started it, but I really and truly want to get into that work. And the science background in me is very curious to how it's all intertwined. Someone said to me the other day, they're just like, I just want to know why. Like, why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to my body? And I have the same questions. Why is this happening? What's going on? And by solidifying that for myself, I can then help translate it and pass that on to my clients. So I'm excited to get into that and to see what's really happening. And I've been applying different things that I find and learn about. I am reflecting it back to myself, and I am recognizing, oh, this is my window of tolerance, and this is it shrinking, or how can I make it bigger? And by doing that, I just think that's great learning in itself. The window of tolerance is the place where we would like to be on a day-to-day basis. We can handle the stressors, we can handle everything coming at us, we feel good. And if there's a few bumps along the way, if we're in our window of tolerance, we will be okay. We have it on lock, we have it handled. Mm-hmm. Our window of tolerance is not set at a certain
width.
Yes.
Sure.
So it can close and open day to day. So it's not going to be the same tomorrow, the next day. It's going to ebb and flow.
Right.
So if your window of tolerance is shrinking from stress, from your husband not helping you at home clean up messes, and it's shrinking, the other stressors that you're going to encounter in your life is going to put you on this roller coaster and put you in hyper arousal or hypo arousal. So you're going to recognize you're going to have less patience. Mm-hmm. Yes, to deal with these things. But it is good to know, everyone listening out there, that you can widen your window of tolerance if we recognize and acknowledge us and ourselves going into a hyper arousal state or down below into a hypo arousal state. Mm-hmm. We have the ability to use certain coping mechanisms, do certain things to get us back into our window of tolerance and widen it so that we can continue on our journey and continue to cope with things that come our way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's fair to say that people who are coming to therapy in sort of a more reactive rather than proactive standpoint are coming with a narrowed window of tolerance, right? Yes. And they're realizing that they don't have a lot of stress capacity. They're not really able to cope, and most things are sort of tipping them into disproportionate reactions or overwhelm or freeze or whatever that might be, whatever the response is, but it's putting them in an inability to function optimally in their lives. And so usually that's compressed. And so in sessions, we're also very mindful of that in terms of protecting the client so that we're helping them expand it, but we're also not overwhelming their window of tolerance in the sessions themselves. Mm-hmm. So therapists are really careful to see, what can you handle? How deep can we go with this? What kind of strategies do you have for keeping yourself feeling safe? And so I think that's a really important thing to recognize as well, that we're mindful of that because we want to safely help you rebuild your ability to sustain things, to tolerate the regular stressors of life and have them not overwhelm your system, right? So it's a really important concept. We'd probably do a whole thing on just window of tolerance, but I'll circle back to you, Rebecca, with any further comments on that.
Yeah. So just one other resource that I wanted to point out was, it just ties in with Jennifer as well, having the different types of learners, the visual, the audio. So sometimes with my youth clients, I like to have something tactile that they can hold on to and they can look at, and it just kind of makes more sense to them. Mm-hmm. So what I have here is affirmation cards. So I will give them to the client in session, and after we've processed some things, near the end, I give them the deck and I say, okay, pick out 2 or 3 that you'd like to focus on this week, or that you can come back to this week to ground yourself. So one of them is, I'm not defined by the thoughts that pop into my head, just for example. So if they pick
Mhm.
2 or 3 of those out, then it's another coping mechanism. They can come back to them. It's a way of grounding themselves when those stressors do come to them in life.
So great. I love that too, because not, again, going back to resources being broader. I know we talked a lot about books, but that's not the only space for resources. And I think Nadera is going to talk to us about podcasts, which is another great accessible form. But we do have a couple of card decks also in the center available. So mindfulness card decks and dialectical behavioral therapy for distress tolerance skills. And so they're shuffleable. Is that a word? Shuffleable? They can be shuffled. Decks of cards where you can pull out different strategies that you can use that fit with the situation. So very tactile, highly accessible, so not everything we have out there. We also have a little book that's like 101 ways to be less stressed. And so it's like literally, one way per page. And so super accessible. You don't have to, be a reader to have these resources like those cards that Rebecca's using that could be super helpful. And like you say, very tactile, and your ability to just kind of shuffle through and what's resonating with me today. What do I need to hold on to? And so, I love the variety that we can offer there to clients. And like you say, sometimes teens will want something a little more tangible. And that's where we can bring in worksheets, or we can bring in workbooks and things. And sometimes that scaffolds the work to give them like a concrete focus. And so there's lots of different ways we can bring that in. Okay, Nadera, tell us about your resources.
Okay. Well, I'd like to start off by saying that I started with a book and it took me into a podcast, and that opened up. I always listen to podcasts, but it opened up podcasts for me in a new light. So for some people who maybe have trouble focusing their thoughts, or sometimes if you're going for a walk and you find yourself just a little anxious or spinning, I like to throw in my headphones and just listen to the voice. And I find that it really helps structure my thoughts, right? So if I'm going for a walk, it helps whatever the podcast is structure my thoughts during that walk. And then I feel like it's a little bit more grounding than letting my thoughts ruminate if that's what I'm going through in the moment. So I started off reading the book Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess by Dr. Caroline Leaf. And I really liked the way she just explained things. So then I looked her up further and I found her podcast. So her podcast is updated weekly, maybe bi-weekly, I think, pretty regularly. And she's got quite a range of topics on there. So you can scroll through and see what it is that's resonating with you at the moment, which is what I like. I like the versatility of it, but also being able to cater what it is that I'm looking for in that moment and search that, find that quite easily. She updates regularly, and she's got long podcasts and she's got short podcasts. So it really works well to fit with whatever it is that you're requiring, whether it's a short drive that I have and I throw on a 20-minute podcast, or if I'm going for an hour-long hike or whatever it may be. I find that there's something there for everybody. But she also gives real world examples and something that's really relatable, right? So she'll use relatable examples based on current events or what's going on in the world or common occurrences. And that really helps to connect a lot of her explanations and really make sense of what's going on. So I enjoy her work. It started off with the book and it led me into the podcast. And under similar podcast people under her name, I found Dr. Margaret Rutherford in her podcast, The SelfWork. So I don't know if anyone's ever heard of it. I
No, I
listen
haven't
to
heard
it
of that.
weekly.
Okay.
She updates weekly. I know that for a fact. She connects multiple episodes, which is what I like. So I just finished listening to a series of intrusive thoughts. She'll do a podcast, and then a couple weeks later, she'll do like a sequel to that or a segment and just carries it further, which is what I like, because when you hear something right away, sometimes you need to step back and process it and then see what questions come up for you. Sometimes those questions don't come up right away. So then when I listen to the sequel or the connection to the podcast a couple weeks later, then I have some questions, right? And then she goes over and she uses real examples. She gives supportive steps or techniques or strategies that you can use. I find her voice very comforting, which is actually, it's quite grounding when I listen to her. But she's also very engaging. So she really talks as if you're right there with her, right? And she'll ask questions, and I feel like I'm being asked those questions. So when I'm going on a walk and just listening to that, I find it very therapeutic, but it's also a great chance to reflect. And so
Yeah.
that's what I really take from her work. This SelfWork podcast is just a moment to reflect. And so I listen to what she's talking about. I listen to her questions. I listen to her examples. I listen to her strategies. And then I just reflect on it all. And then I just see what comes up for me and take it as it is.
That's amazing. I can't believe I haven't heard of that one, but I'm like, now I'm really intrigued. I have to put it in my list of many, many podcasts. But what I was thinking about there is just circling back to Dr. Caroline Leaf for a second. One of my favorite podcasts that she did was about swearing and mental health. And I don't know, did you listen to that one, Nadera?
I did.
Yeah, because it was her kids, I think, who were like challenging her. So I believe she's South African. And she's a neurobiologist.
Yeah.
Neuroscientist. So she comes at it from a really interesting like brain research like foundation. It's really, really amazing. But also she's a mom and she has sort of grown kids probably in their 20s or something. And so this was kind of like a taboo thing, like to swear for her, if I remember it correctly. And then she was like, her kids challenged her. She's like, you really should look into the research around swearing. I don't know if you've seen those. My daughter Gwyneth has a thing that her friend bought her for her desk that says maybe swearing would help on it. Like it's like a little, but she basically looked into the research. She's like, well, actually, in some cases, like these are the parameters. And she talks about the science behind it and how, not so much swearing at other people, but being able to express things in, strong language can be really cathartic for people. And so it just was really interesting, like her own humility in her research to like go and actually, well, what does the research say? And maybe I need to expand my perspective. So she's just so curious and inquisitive. I love that about her. But I also almost always recommend that people listen to her on half time, like 0.5, because she's like,
quick.
so brilliant. She speaks so quickly that people are like, I'm missing everything. So she might have a 20-minute podcast, but there's 60 minutes worth of material there. So I always recommend that people listen to her on 0.5 time so that they can like take it in. But when you were talking about Margaret Rutherford, have I got the name right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds like one of those podcasts that like, I really like to be able to sit with a pen in hand sometimes too. Like, so there's some more conversational podcasts, like even what we're talking about today might be that style where you can you're listening as you're walking or driving. But there's other podcasts where you're really being prompted to do some thoughtful reflection. And it's great to like sit and write out some of that stuff and use it as a way to integrate journaling too. Like I find that can be super helpful just to use those exercises, whether it's at the end of a book and like pause and do some writing, or whether it's during a podcast and just engaging with that and journaling your thoughts and then taking those reflection questions and like maybe pressing pause and taking a bit of time right there. And what is coming up for me? How can I process that? What's resonating? So I think it's really neat to be able to sort of be interactive with whatever resources we have. I know for me, like English teacher, I talk a lot about when I was teaching about how to integrate with books, like really working with texts. So highlighting things, writing marginal comments, writing questions that come up for you, and like really integrated learning with that, not sort of the resources here and I'm here and there's a discrete line between us, but like, how am I working with the text, with the podcast, with the cards, with, whatever we're bringing forward and gleaning what I need and capturing my own thoughts and reactions and insights related to that. So I think that's really, really cool. And something I like to get going, which I'm hoping we'll be able to do more in the new year is more sort of what I like to call book club therapy groups, where we are taking an existing resource and doing group sessions around that workbook or around that self-help book or whatever it is, and actually structuring some groups so that we can meet together and read together. And so it's like a book club, but we're actually doing it from a psychotherapy standpoint. And so I would love to integrate that more in the new year. It's been my vision for a long time, but COVID threw a wrench into some of that. So maybe we'll get back to some of that with all these really great resources and just offering that to people who would find that format very, very helpful in healing for them. So I'm aware of time. We said we do about half an hour together. So tell me, is there anything, any final comments or resources that came up? I guess I could share mine while you're thinking of that. So one of my favorite, Matthias Barker, has a podcast, and he has a great TikTok page and an Instagram page, and he's just a really accessible person to follow. We haven't talked about like people who are on social media platforms, but he's one who is on some really cool social media platforms and bringing mental health information and conversations to that format, which I think is really great. There's some weird parameters around doing that, lots of things you have to think through ethically, but I think he's doing a good job of it. And I also really enjoy Dr. Soph from the UK. So Dr. What is her last name? She wrote a book called A Manual for Being Human is her book, I believe. Anyway, she's really cool. She's a great one to follow along with too. Just really simple, really accessible. She's just sort of down to earth and just talks about things like they are. She's sort of that wholehearted vibe, you know, coming forward in those platforms. So if you're on social media, those are a couple of names that you could look up and follow along with that you might find has a lot of really great content. So lots of places to get great resources, including right here at Covey Wellness Center. So yeah, any final comments from the crew before we wrap up? I definitely have a couple more resources that I want to put on my list from this conversation, and more and more questions to come. And we'll definitely do this again and maybe pick up. So this is kind of part 2 of what we'd planned, but we'll definitely do some other conversations, whether it's one-on-one or in different combos on different topics along the way. So stay tuned to our Instagram, and, you know, to our, if you're following on our digital media page on the website, you can access these resources. So I hope it was helpful, and I hope you'll come and visit us to grab some great resources to support your health and well-being. Thanks everybody for your contributions. Okay, have a great day.
Thank you.
Until next